We will be having a lunch and learn each month. It will be on the second Tuesday from noon to 1-ish. Our goal is to not cut into anybody's day any further than we need to. But if it's a great topic, we might go over a couple of minutes. So our next one will be on February 13th. And that topic is sounding like it's going to be involving ODOT and bridges. So stay tuned for more, and that will be coming up on the website in about a week. Otherwise, just another quick announcement. We do have our annual business meeting coming up at the River House in Bend, and that's going to be from May 19th to the 22nd. And information on registration will be coming out hopefully in the next month. So we'll get all that taken care of. We've got a great line of education coming out. Always a good time to see everybody and reconnect as well. So with that, I don't want to cut into Glenn's time anymore, but I'd like to introduce Glenn Geiger, and he'll be doing our topic today.
Well, thank you, Anne Marie. I appreciate it. Hopefully everybody can hear and see okay. I saw some thumbs up earlier, so that's great. We will feel free to put things in the chat. We'll probably take questions at the end, but you can make comments as we're going through. That would be appreciated. This is actually one of my favorite topics, talking about Chapter 4 and its importance to us as fire inspectors and code enforcement people. I think it is one of the more important pieces in the fire code, and sometimes one that is unfortunately maybe skipped over for some of the more meat and potato topics that are in the fire code. But that's why we want to talk about this one especially today. I realize this is your lunch hour. In my mind, you are all eating grilled cheese sandwiches. You're at the fire station sitting around the table instead of in this virtual environment. And you probably have tomato soup with those grilled cheese sandwiches. And if I concentrate hard enough, I might actually be able to picture that. If my slides will work. Yes, there it is. There you are, all sitting around the firehouse table with your grilled cheese and tomato soup. That's how I'm picturing it anyway. Okay, so as Anne Marie said, we didn't have anything for lunch and learn last month because of the holidays. But when we did have our very first session, David Mills talked to us about fire resistive construction. And again, these are kind of the back to basic topics. Those separations with fire walls and fire barriers and partitions are important as basic building blocks for understanding the code, not just because they create separate uses in different buildings, but are working together. Those assemblies work to create a path to the exit. So the means of egress is created by these fire resistive components. And one of the concepts that we have and it is dear to us is this idea that if everything else goes wrong, the most important thing that we want to be able to ensure is that people are able to get out of the building. And so this idea of fire resistive construction, as David talked about in November, and then what we're going to be talking about, the human component of evacuation and getting out of the building, is why we're hitting this with a 1-2 punch here with these early lunch and learns. So if we think about a building and those fire resistive components, they are passive measures, right? So
reading about all the inspections, I was like, so I feel like they're all done.
There we go. We need to mute all those microphones. Thank you. So we have passive components that the building is constructed of. That same very sophisticated building, in the case of, let's say, a high-rise building or an institution like a hospital, is also going to have fire protection systems in it. So sprinklers and notification systems. This stairwell that these folks are going down may be pressurized. So they are very, very safe buildings in a lot of cases. So here we have, in one photo, we can see a lot of things going on. We have humans reacting to it. We've got the first responders coming in. We've got the building occupants going out, and we've got the safe non-combustible part of the building where people are using it to safely get out and get to the public way. Well, that's very different than what we're talking about today. So when we're talking, our topic today are going to be about these residential homes that are being used for a different purpose. So if you think about a residential home, in fact, your own house, they typically can have a lot more fuel load in them. So we can store a lot of things in our closets and our garages, and we just have a higher number of combustible items in our homes. And these are residential homes. The other difference with the use of these residential homes, as we can see in this picture, the people in these care facilities are not necessarily able to get themselves out. So in the case of the care homes on the left, these two young gentlemen are not able, if there was a fire, to have the wherewithal or the physical ability to be able to get themselves out of that house. Even though it's made out of wood and it doesn't have all the sophisticated fire protection systems built into it. They are very reliant on the staff lady on the left to get them out. And as we'll see later, there can be a very large number of infants and children inside of that residential dwelling. On the other side, we have adult foster homes. Again, the numbers are lower, much lower with adult foster homes, but here you can see an example of people that have walkers and canes and wheelchairs and that sort of thing in order to get out. And in order to safely get those people out, we have time requirements in an adult foster home in order to get them out. So again, we have buildings that were constructed for a single family, perfectly capable in most cases of getting themselves out of the building, that are now repurposed, have a different use, where most of the occupants in them are not able to get themselves out, at least with some or a lot of assistance. So that's the difference. We don't have these passive systems. We're relying on people to get themselves out. So that's the hook. I always try to put a hook at the beginning of my classes. Hopefully that kind of gets your attention. You see the problem. And now we're going to talk about how the fire code takes that problem and tries to find a solution to it. And the solution for training people and getting them to do the right thing is what we call Chapter 4. And it's why it really should not be a forgotten chapter, especially when it comes to these types of occupancies. It should be the most important chapter when it comes to care facilities, especially in a house. So we'll go over Chapter 4 here, and hopefully you'll see how it's used and its structure and the steps that we take in order to figure out what we humans, when we're in these situations, need to know. So it's divided up into 7 sections, as you can see on the screen. And the first one are the general requirements. And the general requirements, if you look at section 401, are very, very general. Really what it says is that regardless of the occupancy type, which most of the chapters divided up into occupancies, throwing all of that out, in any building that's regulated under the fire code, the general responsibility for the people in there is to call for the fire department when they need help. That's really what section 401 tells you in so many words, is to call and get help coming regardless of the use or occupancy of the building. As with almost all the chapters, well, all the chapters? Yep, all the chapters in the fire code. The second part of that chapter are the definitions, which is going to send you to Chapter 2 in most cases. And we'll talk about that quite a bit during this hour. When something is not defined in there, then this is the edition of Merriam-Webster's that you want to use, the collegiate edition and the 11th version of that. So that is the one that if something is not defined, you would go to find out what this word means, or that those sort of incidental words. So that's the proper dictionary to have on your shelf at your fire station. Of course, there are other places where we get definitions, the mechanical code, the structural code, the residential code, all the NFPA standards loaded with definitions early in their books as well, right? So definitions, section 2. Okay, this is where the steps come in, and hopefully this might be a little bit different way of visualizing the chapter and how to use it. But this is where you really want to start. Step 1, when using chapter 4, emergency preparedness, the human chapter, is to get to the right occupancy class. And so all the occupancy classes that have requirements for emergency preparedness are in there. So you just need to get to the correct one and then use that as a guide to what else is required. So, excuse me, if we take an example, let's just use a hospital, just because it's one of the most common things that we think about in occupancy type that might require a lot of emergency preparedness. We can see on this slide that at the top there, it refers to section 404, which is the emergency and evacuation plans. So not only does this section for hospitals, group I2, give you some requirements, number 1 through 5, it says that in addition to 1 through 5, all the requirements that are pertinent in section 404 also pertain. If you go to the very bottom of the slide, you'll see section 405. It doesn't have anything special about requirements here. For hospitals, it just tells you to follow all of the pertinent and relative information in section 405. And then really the third piece of this is the staff training, which is super important. So there are specific things for staff training in a hospital, and those are listed here. Staff training in general is section 406 in chapter 4. So again, 404, section 404 in chapter 4 are the different types of plans that are required. There are 3 types that are listed there, and there information for all 3. The first one is what you would imagine, the evacuation plan, how to get out of the building. And part of the requirements for evacuation plans is having a diagram like this that is going to show you where those exit doors are in relation to where you're standing. Your primary, secondary, assembly points, fire extinguishers, all that type of stuff. Another type of plan that's listed is just a general fire safety plan. A lot of times these are combined into one book, the fire evacuation and the safety plan, all in one volume. But there are separate requirements for fire safety plans. And then the third one is the lockdown plan. Each one of these is in a bulleted, or probably better described as a enumerated type of a format. And I don't think that they're necessarily thinking of you, the poor fire inspector, needing this information. I think it's in this format because they want it to be super end user friendly, so when it goes to the building owner, it's already blocked out for you. And it's very easy for you to take that information and in the enumerated format and get it to the building owner to use. Here are the pieces that you need to have for your fire safety evacuation plan. And here's a list of the things that are needed. So it's very user-friendly format. Evacuation, safety, and lockdown plans in section 404. Once we have those plans, we need to practice. So drills are required, excuse me again, by chapter 4. And those drills, there is a table in section 405 that will tell you by occupancy type who needs to drill and how often. So that's in there. What I'm showing here is a active shooter drill in a school. And while active shooter drills are not a requirement out of the fire code, in fact, NFPA 3000 and the whole ASHER requirements are not yet adopted in the fire code, you may be asked to have input on these types of drills by the school district. And so that should not be a surprise. That's why I picked this, is just so that we can kind of mention that this is another type of drill that may be going on out there. And then it also is a good picture showing a classroom door. And there are requirements so far as locks, and the requirements for locks on for lockdown in a school for both existing and new situations. And they're in different parts of the code. That's not today's topic, but in one picture there, we can see a lot going on when it comes to drills and the different things that would be required out of the chapter. Then the last step is, of course, training. And none of this stuff really matters unless people know about it. And so staff training is super important in just about any situation. And Chapter 4 does not forget about that. So Section 406, again, is going to talk about who needs to be taught, what they need to be taught, and how often it needs to be taught. Again, based on the occupancy and the use of the building. That's Section 406. And then the last one, they put this one in for Chief Hawkins, is the hazmat component. When we have an occupancy that has hazardous materials in it, we need to have plans for those. That information not only has to be available to the building occupants and be drilled on when necessary, but as first responders, we have to have access to this information as well. And so Section 407 really lines out all the requirements for having those hazardous material information available and what needs to be done so far as training on them with those safety data sheets. Okay, so that in a quick overview is Chapter 4. I think the most important pieces of this are understanding the step process starting in 403 with identifying your occupancy and moving through the other pieces. This is not to say that when we are looking at occupancy and using Chapter 2, that we get to decide as fire code officials what that occupancy is. You all know by now that it is the building official who has the authority to make the determination on what that occupancy and use is. So it's good for us to know these things. We have to understand them. That's why we teach them and why you learn them. So that if you see a use or an occupancy that has changed during your inspection, then you can write a violation for the building owner to get a permit to have that occupancy changed. So it is important for us to understand occupancy class groups, but what that occupancy ultimately becomes is up to this person, and that's the building official. So let me see, do I have my chat open here? Yeah, so if you could throw in the chat where you go to look for occupancy class. So it's in the fire code somewhere. Where specifically do you have to navigate to get to occupancy class? Hopefully there are enough of you awake out there that somebody will put something in the chat. 202. Yes, Mark, 202, 202. Where? Okay, so in 202, you are all correct. I see a bunch of 202s there, but where specifically in 202? So break it down even further. So we're in 202, but is it the front of 202? Where in 202? A little tougher. No one? Occupancy classification there, Ben. Beep, 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 beep. Ben wins. He typed it in there fast, and you typed a lot too. That's pretty good. That's impressive. Yeah, in the O's, Tim Stacy. Yep, it's under O. Well, you guys get a little sneak preview, and don't tell anybody. This is a secret, but screen to go. Yes, in the 2025, again, don't tell anyone. The definitions are going to get their own section. So they're going to become section 203. So no more going to the thing and trying to get to the O's in the definitions. you're going to be able to have a tab. They'll come up with a tab that's right at 203. You'll be able to go whoop, right to 203. It's the little things, everybody. So we're looking forward to that coming at the end of the year. Okay. So let's talk about some definitions. And this is a good one. A lot of you know this. Sometimes you may not have seen it displayed this way. So maybe this visual will help you. But I want to talk about the difference between a sleeping unit and a dwelling unit, because this is an important concept when we're talking about these residential units. So the difference between a sleeping unit and a dwelling unit is that a sleeping unit is not a complete living unit. There's something missing in it. So yes, it will have sleeping, and yes, it'll have living room, but it doesn't have all four pieces in it. So it doesn't have sleeping, cooking, bathing, and living. So probably the first sleeping unit type that comes to mind is a hotel room. It has the couch and the chair and a TV. That's the living area. It has the double queen bed. That's the sleeping area. And it has the bathroom with all those. That's a sleeping unit. You go to your kid's dorm room, college dorm room, and all it is their PlayStation and a bed. That's a sleeping unit. There's no other facilities. If they get hungry, they need to go someplace else, and there's usually a group bathroom down the hall. So those are sleeping units. A dwelling unit is the complete setup, right? And you can think of this might be a little cheesy, but it might help you. You dwell there. It's not just the sleeping time, but you dwell in the sleeping unit. They're there for more than just sleeping. So if you're in a hotel room, you just go there to sleep. If you're in college, you just go to your room to sleep. In the dwelling unit, you dwell. And so when you have all of those pieces where you're doing all the pieces of living in there, it's a dwelling unit. When we have one or two of those, it's a dwelling. So if there's one, it's a one family dwelling. You can have a 1 and 2 family dwelling. And those are R3s, right? Once you have more than two, then you leave being an R3 and you become an R2. And those are apartments and condos and that sort of thing. So you group a bunch of these individual dwellings together, and you hop from being an R3 to an R2 and all of those requirements. So that's the difference between a sleeping unit and a dwelling unit. And the only difference I would say if you look at the very bottom of the diagram, you see those vertical yellow lines. If those were true firewalls, and you were separating each one of those dwelling units out, and they were separated by whatever, probably 2-hour construction, then they would drop back potentially to an R3, right? Your decision? No, building official's decision. But think of townhouses. Those could be individual R3 units that you could not go in and inspect if they have firewalls between them. Okay. Sleeping units and dwelling units, that's the difference. Okay, so let's look at those sleeping units in the context of R1, 2, 3, and 4. And a lot of this has to do with numbers, depending on what you are and the use and whether you're transient or non-transient. And so let's just kind of go through these quickly. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but let's just kind of go through this, because if you're like me and you go to chapter 2 and the O's now, and you're looking at like, what's the difference between this and that? You've got your fingers in different, between different pages, and you're flipping back and forth and trying to, look at like, okay, this one says 6 and this one says 16, and this one over here says 5, and you're getting all confused. Here's one slide that kind of takes, and I realize it's more detailed than this. This is just kind of a, that high level overview of how these things work. But based on the numbers and whether you're transient and how it's used, this is generally how they're laid out, okay? So if you're an R1, that's transient folks. So that's less than 30 days. They're not familiar with the building. They don't know about the fire protection systems. They don't know well about the exiting and all that sort of thing. They're not there for a long time. They're there to sleep, right? They're just there. They're not even there all day. They're just there to crash at night. So they're transient. When we have more than 10, they're an R1. When they're less than 10, less than 11, they could be an R3 like an Airbnb. So you see that that's listed as one of the categories under an R3. So less than 11, you go from an R1 to an R3. R3, as you'll see, is kind of the catch-all for all these. When they are non-transient, so they are familiar with their building. They're not just there to sleep. They live there all the time. The number, we allow more of them. We can have 16, and they're familiar with it. They're able to, we're more confident that they're going to know their way around and be able to get out. So we allow more of them, and that's an R2. So think of it that way. When since R3 is kind of the catch-all, we'll skip over that and we'll go to the R4. R4 are the care facilities, and they're kind of a sweet spot care facility. They're more than an R3, so more than 5, which R3s are all under 5 for this type of use. But they're not more than 16, which would be an institution, right? So they're in the sweet spot, mostly 6 to 16, with some exceptions maybe. And and just a little value added, the two main types of care facilities would be assisted living facilities. We're really familiar with those. Those people are more capable of getting themselves out, need less assistance getting themselves out. The requirements for an assisted living facility are fewer than its close cousin, the residential care facility, where they are less capable, need more help getting out, but they're still an R4. So, but there are higher requirements in something that is a residential care facility by their license requirements. So, so that kind of breaks down the R1 through 4 categories in kind of a quick visual and a way of thinking about them so far as their use, their transient versus non-transient nature, and really those numbers are big drivers, okay? So let's look at another slide, and this one throws out the hotel motel thing and just uses 24-hour care facilities. So we're just talking about care in this case. And if you want to look at, let's stick with the 5 or fewer, because you still see across the top there, the 5 or fewer, the 6 to 16, which are the R4s, and then anything from 17 or greater are the I4s. We saw that looking at it a different way on the previous slide, right? So the R3 to R4 to institution concept. But if we look at just the R3, the 5 or fewer, and we look at the different types of care here, custodial care is help with living. So you have help with meals, you have help with taking your medications, maybe getting dressed, maybe bathing, those types of things. That's custodial care. And when folks are needing custodial care, we can be, and they're under 5, they can be in an R3. If they need medical care, and again, 5 or fewer, also allowed in an R3 in some cases. And so this is probably a little bit of a grayer area as to what is medical care and what isn't. But we can think of like hospice care being in this scenario, recovery, drug recovery type places where they're getting a type of medical care. But again, most of these people are capable of self-preservation. They're receiving medical care, but in an emergency, they can get themselves out, and there are no more than 5 of them. And then the third category of 5 or fewer are the adult foster homes, and that's what we're going to spend more time talking about later. But if we go back up to the custodial care and we go across that row, we can see that once we get to 6 to 16, again, we're in that group R4. And that group R4 has 2 conditions in there. So you have to know not just that it's an R4 because it's in that sweet spot, the Goldilocks 6 to 16, but there are 2 conditions. And the conditions, again, are whether they're able to get themselves out or whether they need assistance. And when you need assistance in emergency, then you're condition 2. And usually in a condition 2, that's when the license requirements kick in. So the DHS license comes into play. So condition 2, license, need help getting out. Don't need help getting out, no license, you're able to do that, you're condition 1. Same exact concept when we get to the 17 or more and we go to the I1. Just more of them, but it's an institution. The building is going to be built differently, right? Because we have so many people. It's going to have compartments and it's going to have a lot more safety features in it. So it's the building change so far as we're concerned with chapter 4. Where we're going, where that exit is may change, but the routine in chapter 4 isn't much different. But that's those are the custodial care situations. Once we get over 5 people with medical care, then we are a group I2, right? And that is that heavy getting, that building that that has all the bells and whistles in it. And the condition 1 and 2 really means the same thing, although it's worded differently. Again, the condition 1 are people that are not able to get them, are able to get themselves out more or less under their own power when the alarm goes off. And the condition 2 are people that are not able to get themselves out on their own. They are heavily dependent on staff in order to get them out. And instead of a license requirement, the code kind of uses these categories or description of reasons why they would be incapacitated and not able to get themselves out. Psychiatric problems. They're under anesthesia because of a surgery. They're in because of a chainsaw injury in the emergency care part of it. So there are different reasons why you are not able to get yourselves out. You need staff assistance. Okay, 24-hour care facilities busted out in a way that is overly simplistic, you might say, but taking a picture of this with your phone is not a bad hit in sticking it in your code book if it's helpful to you. Dramatic pause while you do that. Okay, here we go.
So Glenn, we
Moving.
have a comment in chat. Wendy
Okay.
Stanley asked, any way to modify or simplify the fire drill trainings required at locations like memory care? She was asked by a medical director of a facility who has 3 shifts of staff. Each fire drill can be quite impactful and confusing for the people living there.
I'm going to let Sean take that, and I don't mind doing questions during the presentation, but I would like to mostly hold them up until and just save them to. You can go and put them in the chat, but I would prefer to do them all at the end if we could. But Sean, do you want to answer that while we have Wendy's question out there?
Well, that's what I was going to say. If we can just keep rolling, and then we'll address
Okay.
it right at the end. If you.
Okay, sorry, Wendy. We'll get to you though. We're not going to forget. Okay. All right. So let's look at these facilities up close. And so we're really talking about we're going to focus in now from all the R's and all the I's and all that kinds. Let's just get to really our main topic today, and that's these residential care facilities. And so what I really want to impress upon you here with this slide, and this is just a screen grab right out of the fire code, right out of the definitions for child care facilities and adult foster homes. And that's this idea that these are a private residence. And if you know your statutes, this is kind of like first day fire inspector stuff, but we don't use it all the time. It says right in our main statute that we do not have the authority to go into a private residence and do fire inspections unless we're requested. And so there you can see right in the very definition of a child care facility inside of a dwelling unit, it says it's a private residence. And for the last 50 plus years, there have been legal questions about the authority to go into an adult foster home and inspect those. And every single time the answer has come back from the legal minds, yes, an adult foster home is a private residence, even though its use has changed. The 5 folks that are in that family home are a family. That's why the family is word is highlighted here. It is a family home, and we do not routinely have the authority to go into that adult foster home with a surprise inspection. We need to be requested. Just after the statute that says you cannot go in and inspect a private residence is followed up by the actual process for being able to do this. And it's in statute. We're not going to get into it during this class, but just below that, in statute, it says if you're an adult foster home, this is how an inspection works and how it's requested. So that is in there. But it's also important to know that we have partners in this whole process, right? So, and it starts with legislation. So at the state capitol building, there is a bill that's proposed to protect people that are in these situations, in these homes that are receiving this care, and how are we going to protect them? And so the bill will direct whichever state agency covers them, whether it's the Department of Early Learning or Human Services, and it directs those agencies, those state agencies, to create rules or OARs, and those OARs will end up in the fire code and in the OAR with directions that say that they need to meet the requirements of the fire code and or have a fire code inspection by a fire marshal. Usually the term they use, fire marshal. So there is a legal nexus, a legal connection for you to go in to do fire inspections when requested, especially when it comes in part with receiving a state license from one of these agencies. So an example, and these are just a couple of pages, 2 pages out of the entire code book, right? So on the left is 1 page out of chapter 4. The other one is the front page of Adult Foster Home Appendix R. And if we zoom in a little bit on this and we take a look, you can see that we reference those very statutes and those very rules in the fire code so that we have a clear path to compliance. This is the scope and authority, the dreaded scope and authority part of any presentation. Here it is. You can see in there, we see Chapter 415, that's a state agency. Chapter 411, that's a state agency. So we have these agencies that are needing fire inspections for their licensing requirements. And those we update every code cycle. They change a little bit sometimes. We make sure that those rules and statutes still apply. That's part of the subcommittee task is somebody will say, yep, I'm going to go look at all those statutes and rules and make sure those are still the ones that are applicable. And so we update those every 3 years. Okay, so those are in there. We have the authority to do them upon request. Okay, so we've got our 2 different types. We've got child care centers. People don't live there 24 hours, but adult foster homes, they do. And we'll look at these now closer and in more detail, each one, as promised. So there's this general umbrella term called child care facilities. And that's the high level, broad stroke definition of all these things, child care facilities. The one on the left is a child care center. That's a commercial building. So that's going to be like KinderCare or La Petite or something like that. And even though that is also a child care facility, It's not in a private residence. Okay, so you can go inspect that as often as you want because it's not a private residence. So stop in, inspect it as a Group E. In red, in each one of these cases, you will see the set of rules that the early learning folks use for their safety. So if you want to write those down and go look at the details, you can do that. Understanding, of course, that that agency, early learning, they are the ones that enforce the bulk of those rules. Okay, the only part of that that you get to enforce is what's rolled over into the fire code. All right. So that's your authority as the fire code, not these rules. That's just for reference if you want to get into the details. But let's drill down even further and take a look at these homes. So forget about the kinder care and let's look at these homes. They come in two different varieties. One is called a registered child care family child care home, and the other one is a certified. And the difference really is the number of infants and kids in them. So in the registered, the maximum are 10 infants and kids. The restrictions are a little easier, so it's a 2-year license versus an annual. When you go to use Chapter 4 and you go into Section 403 and you're looking for the requirements for these, so what is your responsibility for getting them out of this very unsophisticated building with lots of fuel? You go to Group R3 and it's going to say licensed care facilities there. So that's the section that you want to use. It's going to give you the pointers to the drills and the training and all the other goodies that are in there. Again, it's Division 205 is the early learning division for all the details on that. Believe it or not, you can have a single family, a building that was built for a single family with 16 infants and kids in it. And not only are they there potentially during the day, these aren't just daycare centers. We don't call them daycare. They can have night care, which means that they're sleeping in both conditions. So again, so if the hook wasn't big enough at the beginning of this to get your attention, hopefully now you're rehooked and understanding the importance of making sure that when you go to do a inspection linked to the licensing of these facilities, that you are resolute in making sure that they are adhering to all their drills, that they're capable of getting all these kids out, that they're meeting all their staffing requirements and all the things that are required and meeting their times. Super important, because this is really the only thing, the only safety net that we have as fire inspectors is to make sure that they're maintaining their license, right, and doing their drills. So that's the part that we want to make sure of. That's the part that we have control over. If you want to read all those details about like how many caregivers can be awake versus asleep and when, all that stuff is in Division 205 and Division 350 if you want to read all that later on at your own time. But that's just kind of a quick overview. Registered and certified family child care homes and the large amount of kids, infants, and children that are allowed to be in them. We kind of promised that we were going to talk about sprinklers in these, and so here we go. This is important to know, super important to know. As of January 26th of 2022, these child care centers we've been talking about need to have sprinklers in them. Okay, there is a BCD bulletin that came out. I'm going to tell you how to get to that in just a second. That says that you have to have sprinklers in new facilities. We're not talking about the existing ones. We're talking about the new ones, and there are examples of what new means. So take a look at the bulletin to figure out, to read all those examples and get dialed in on that. But there are, for those that were built after or became new facilities, not built, but became new facilities after January 26 of 22, you can also meet 3 conditions instead of having the sprinklers. So it's a long story how all this happened, but basically it was a piece of legislation that said, no, we're going to also offer these 3 alternatives, or this alternative with 3 conditions to having the sprinklers. And so that is in there. It is also, and this has been around for a while, old enough to be in our old code book. If you look at the current Oregon Fire Code in the fire sprinkler section under 903.2.8.4, you're going to see this very thing. It's going to have those 3 conditions listed in there for these child care facilities. Okay. Well, let's go through those real quick so that we understand exactly what we're talking about, because these conditions are super important. It's going to allow these places to get out of having the 13D sprinkler system. So the first thing says is that only provide childcare on the level of exit discharge. Now, back when we first became inspectors and code enforcement people, we learned what the level of exit discharge is, but then we get out and we start doing our work and we kind of forget. So this is just real quick, down and dirty, not going to spend a lot of time on it, but just a quick graphic that shows you that the level of exit discharge is a volume. It's a story. It's not the plane. It's not the ground level. It's not the floor level. It's an area from the floor to the ceiling. It's that first story in this case. Okay, so it's a volume of space that where they can have childcare. Why that's important, if we take a multi-storied childcare facility, this is a real one, and we look at all 4 levels of it, we can see that the 3rd floor attic space is not the level of exit discharge, pretty clear. The 2nd floor is not the level of exit discharge. The basement level down here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, I guess you can. This is not the level of exit discharge. The only place where they can have childcare is on this level. And so the question always comes up, well, do the stairs count? Is that a disqualifier? No, that they can have the stairs that go down to the public way. That's part of the level of exit discharge. So without sprinklers, let's just connect the dots again here. Without sprinklers, they are restricted to having childcare, to having kids under their care to this level in this house, not down below, only on this level. Okay, that's condition number 1. Condition number 2 is that they have to have a clear path to the door that's away from the cooking appliances. It's a very minimum number, 3 feet. It's not much. The reason for getting out, I would assume, is that that stove is on fire, right? And this is the only door. We know that if you spent time on the line or had a fire at your house on the stove, that when that's hot and smoky, 3 feet isn't very much, but that's the number that is the minimum that's required between the path to get that door and the built-in cooking appliance. Okay, not very much, but 3 feet. So level of exit discharge, 3 feet away from the cooking appliance. Also in condition number 2 are locked doors. We don't want locked doors. So if this is the floor plan looking down from heaven onto that childcare facility, and they have a separate room, quiet room for sleeping, the doors cannot be locked. They need to be unlocked at all times in order to reach the exit. Nor could you, and I can't imagine how this would work, but nor could you go through a storage room. Okay, it needs no storage. But the main thing is staying away from the stove, no locked doors. Okay, is condition number 2. Condition number 3, don't skip this one, super important. They have to have provided documentation to the building official that they're meeting all their licensing requirements. So all the safety requirements that were in 205 and 350, which are significant, they have to meet all those safety requirements and have a license. And they need to present that documentation and proof to the building official to say, we have a license, we meet all their licensing requirements by early learning, we're good to go, we don't need to have a sprinkler. And the building official can decide, yes, you have your license, you're only going to provide care on the level of exit discharge with exits that go directly to the outdoors, and you don't have any locked doors that kids are going to be behind. With you meet all those conditions, you do not need to have sprinklers. And if you are before January of 22, there are no requirements for sprinklers at all. You don't have to meet the sprinkler requirement, nor do you need to meet the requirements that I just listed. You just need to meet the fire code requirements and the original licensing rules, okay? Do not need to have the 3 requirements or sprinklers. I know what you're asking yourself. What are the differences between these residential heads and standard spray heads? Okay, you really weren't asking yourself, but I think this is good information. So these 13D systems, you know, I think we all know that the main difference with these 13D systems is that they are life safety, right? They're protecting the exit way out. They're not property protection. We're just getting out, right? The other thing that's different about them is that they use residential heads. And this is the part that we probably don't think about very often. So this is your standard spray head that goes into a non-residential setting. And you can see it's putting lots and lots of water on the floor. In fact, if we had obstructions in there, like, hey, there's a ductwork, there's ductwork there, and, we're looking at that 4 feet, we're not getting the floor wet. Isn't that kind of what we, kind of our mindset? It was like, hey, the floor's not getting wet. Well, when we go into a residential setting, we're not really talking about the floor getting wet. We're concerned about keeping the ceiling. So the pattern for those residential sprinkler heads is near the ceiling and towards the walls. If you wouldn't mind, why don't we get some brainstorming going on and just quickly tell me, why are we trying to keep the ceiling cool and not putting water on the floor with residential heads? Anybody have some guesses? There's more than one, but what are some good reasons for keeping the sprinkler pattern near the ceiling in a residence, in our R3s that need them? Tenability, flashover. Oh, there's the word I was looking for. Tenability, same thing, different word. Flashover is the word. That's the one I was looking for. There are other reasons, like they're small rooms. Most of the fuel load is against the walls, different versus in a commercial setting, different things. But the flashover, this is the fire investigation part that kicks in our heads, I think. People die because of flashover. And if we can keep that ceiling cool, we're buying them a lot more time. So right on, Mark Welch. If I had a virtual prize to give you, I would do so right now. But sorry, buddy. Okay, so that's the child care centers. Let's move on to adult foster homes now. And the picture on the left is what we want to think of adult foster homes being. We've got the elderly couple maybe in golf shirt and pink blazer, and they're reading Great Creatures, Great and Small, whatever that book. Just everything's great. But if you've been on the engine company and you go to adult foster homes routinely in your response area, the picture on the right is more typical of what you're going to see in an adult foster home. And I'm going to go with this as an older picture going by the TV and the telephone. But regardless, I mean, they're going to be in wheelchairs, they're going to be in walkers, and again, unsophisticated buildings, they're only going to have alarms in them for alerting them. Yes, they're going to have portable fire extinguishers and that sort of thing, but we're going to have high fuel loads in there. We're going to have obstacles in there. We're going to have people that are going to need assistance in there. Some of them may be borderline needing medical care, be on oxygen, and all these things that are going to slow us down, right? And this is the most important thing, is being able to get out of these unsophisticated, simple, overloaded buildings in amount time. The clock is ticking, and we have 5 people to get out. This is our challenge, and this is why Chapter 4 is so important to us, okay? And the licensing is so important to us. Important concepts then are, and this is kind of a definition, I guess you could say, but Where are we going to once we get out that door? So now we're on the outside of the adult foster home. We have what are called points of safety. So this is that assembly area. The first assembly area that we're aiming for is the initial point of safety, the IPS. And it needs to be a minimum, and this is all in Appendix R. It needs to be a minimum of 25 feet away from that outside wall of the adult foster home. So we're aiming to get them out to that initial point of safety in 3 minutes. That is not much time. Think about that from thinking back to the picture that we just looked at, right? Trying to get 5 people out on the other side of this tree in 3 minutes. Okay, it's a challenge. That's a challenge, but they have to do it. After we get everybody together on the far side of the tree, we have an additional 5 minutes to get to our final point of safety, wherever that is. That's a total of 50 feet away. So another 25 feet. Doesn't have to be in a line. It can be like this where it's in a different direction, but it needs to ultimately be at least another 50 feet away from the adult foster home. So it could be in this pull out in front of the house. Hopefully the neighbors will let them in if it's cold out and do things. But the point is they have to be an additional, a total of 50 feet away with an additional 2 minutes or 5 minutes total. Where that shows up in, and there are other things in Chapter 4 in adult foster homes, but where that shows up for this, insofar as drills and making sure that they are practicing this, is in the drill schedule, which is table 405.3. And you can see that the adult foster homes, they are to do this every 90 days with all occupants. And the D there just footnote means that they're practicing going to that point of safety is what the D footnote means. So why every 90 days? You can think of it because that seems like overkill, right? It was like, well, are they going to forget in 90 days? No, they're not going to forget, but their condition may change. They may have been able to do it 3 months ago, but now they can't. And when they can't, that gets found out by having the drill, right? So that's why we're going every 90 days on that. My red line unfortunately goes through it, but I think you can kind of read there that the line just above, that's the childcare centers, childcare homes, and there they're doing it semi-annually, only twice a year. But there's a big difference in that one too with the childcare homes. They're doing it on each shift because they're not 24 hours. They don't live there, so they could be you have to have the kids on and the crew on night care going through the drill. You have to have the people on swing shift. You have the people on the day. So each shift, whatever the shift they work, they all need to do it twice a year. It's all occupants, but really what we're trying to do is get the staff to do it. And in all these cases, we should mix it up. First time use the primary exit, the second time use the secondary, all those good things. But those are the 2 lines that we're looking at today, and that table out of Chapter 4. Okay. Appendix R. This is really the details for adult foster homes. So this is done every 3 years in cooperation with Department of Human Services, and they get input on any changes that we make. We make updates to any rules. And so the things that were agreed upon here, and just this is, there's a lot of stuff in there. Look at it later. But the part that's about evacuation, we talked about the drills every 90 days. One of those needs to be during sleeping hours. I'm not going to make a joke about when sleeping hours are in an adult foster home, but new residents have to be told about how to get out within 24 hours, their first day. Staff training is every 3 months, not every 90 days, mind you, but every 3 months. There's some distinction there with our buddies over at Human Services that I'm not totally aware of, but anyway, 3 months. Floor plans, I think that that could probably better be said as site plan because the floor plan just would be the building, but I think showing where those points of safety are is important. So I would do that as a recommendation. But they're also going to show like locations of fire extinguishers, of course, the exit doors and all the safety things that are needed on those floor plans. Emergency lighting needs to be at least plug-in flashlights that are rechargeable. Ideally, there are ones that are automatically going to come on, but at least flashlights that are easily accessible and recharged. And then there's your evacuation times again. This is the form that they use for doing those evaluations, those drills. You can see that right here, if you can see my cursor, date of the last drill conducted during sleeping hours. So yeah, they're actually doing that, busting people up. So it's on their form. That's their rule. They do it. Other things you can notice here. Does the adult foster home have sprinklers? Yes or no? If yes, see, go to the rule. So time for more fabulous prizes in the chat. What do you think a yes answer means if the adult foster home has sprinklers in it? What changes? Throw your guesses into the chat and let's see if we have anybody that comes up with the correct answer. Remember the prizes, they're wonderful. Anyone got one? You're typing. Lower drill frequency, good guess, close. So the lower drill frequency is very, very close, not exactly right. Amount of people they can have, no. A little colder, still like it, still good guess. Ah, there we go, Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, no wonder you're a, yes, longer evacuation time. So that is it. They have, instead of 3 minutes to get to that initial point of safety, they have 5 minutes to get to the initial point of safety. From the initial point of safety to the final point of safety, that 2 minutes, that stays the same. But the time to evacuate, they get a little extra credit from 3 minutes to 5 minutes if they have sprinklers. So if you want to like, hey, you're having trouble getting your folks out in 3 minutes, you could, recommendation here, you could go and put in a 13D sprinkler system. There are 5 slots on their form for all 5 residents. It has what their evacuation time was, so it is recorded. There's a space there to describe how that went and how much help they needed, so they can track that every 90 days. So that's on there. This is a great form. I have no idea what substitute required means, but that's on them. If I thought about it, I might figure it out. And then there it is. There's the time to the initial point of safety and the final point of safety, the 25 and 50 feet away. So everything they need there to conduct a drill every 90 days. So speaking about the sprinklers and whether they have them or not, I'll just cut to the chase. Are they required? No, they are not required. So again, it's a long story. BCD attempted to do what is, I would say, the right thing and say, hey, we have these places that were built as single family homes. They're no longer being used that way. The use has changed. Because of that, we're going to put a 13D sprinkler system in them. That's the down and dirty. There's more details than that. The legislature again came behind that and said, nope, wait a minute, we're going to postpone that. And they did. And then in the legislative session in 22, they postponed it again. So it's postponed where this requirement kicks in until right now, until July 1st of 2026. And I don't think I'm talking out of school by saying that it may never happen. So we don't know. We're hoping that it does, but it may not. And so this, oh, you know what? I think I forgot to tell you how to get to the childcare bulletin and this one. So let me do that now. both of them are reached in a similar way. Go to the main VCD website. For this one, since we're looking at it, go to the commercial building tab on there. So the codes and standards, commercial buildings, it gets you to the structural code page. You scroll down that page to their technical bulletins, and you'll find this in their listed technical bulletins under the structural code tab. The one for residential or for the childcare is in the residential section. So same thing, start with their codes and standards, go to the residential code tab, and then scroll about halfway down and find the technical bulletins there. Both of these are worth printing out. They're available as PDFs. Go to their website, print them out, put them on bulletin boards or snap them in your code book, whatever you want. They're a great resource. They do a great job of explaining in much more detail than I did the history of this and all the details that you need to know in order to stay current, okay? If this whole idea of not having sprinklers rubs you the wrong way, let me just leave you with this and we'll wrap things up. We have this housing shortage and availability for both types of care. Child care with mom and dads needing to go to work, parents that need to go to work and finding affordable child care. Having places where, whether it's residential training facilities, which we didn't really talk about, they're a close cousin to the adult foster homes, really the same requirements, just different folks, really. But finding affordable residential places for them as well. The access and availability of those places, which would increase with having to put in a sprinkler system, is seen by many people as being a more immediate risk in not having access to them than the potential of having a fire, right? We know that there's an access and availability problem now. There may or may not be a fire. And so the weight has shifted from, yeah, we understand the fire concern, but we need to have these places available. So it really is a matter of perspective and how we look at these. And so with that, that is my presentation for today. We went a little bit over, I can see. I'm sorry about that. Your soup is no doubt cold, but we will certainly open it up, and Sean would love to answer any questions that you have right now.
Right, real quick.
Yes.
Oh, I was just going to say
real
quick, in case anybody has to jump off, don't forget there is a link for the survey and there is a link for the CEU assignments on there. We need to get those filled out for credit. So please make sure you grab those out of the chat in case you have to dash out early.
And
Yeah,
Anne-Marie, I am going to talk about the homework assignment too.
Perfect.
Okay.
Why don't you go ahead and do the homework assignment and then we'll.
Okay, then we'll
that
do
way
questions. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is a homework, and that's either in the chat or going to be in the chat shortly. So download that. Keep this simple, everybody. This is not your master's thesis. I don't, spend spend less than a half an hour on doing this, okay? But this is going to take you in a totally different direction for chapter 4. So this is going to hopefully touch on places where you would not normally go to in the fire code, like, oh, I didn't know we had that. Or some places in chapter 4 that you're like, oh, I've never noticed that before. So go through this. Again, it's not going to get graded. You have to do it in order to get your CEUs, and we're going to read them all. We want to see what you put down, but just go through it, try to get something out of it is the point, and maybe see the fire code a little differently. The important part here after you've done it is to make sure that you save it with your name when you ship it off, and then there's the email address in red. Send it to that email address. I don't think you need the dot after the gov. That's a typo. And then in the subject, put lunch and learn so that when it goes into that box, we can find all of them. That's kind of our generic mailbox. But if you put lunch and learn in the subject, then we'll pull that out and look for your attachment. Okay, that's my Those are my simple instructions for that, and I kept it brief because we're over.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, a couple of you put something in the chat that says it might be the wrong homework, but it actually is the correct homework. Because again, like Glenn was saying, we kind of developed that to kind of get you in other places of the code book that you probably don't normally spend some time in, but it does have a pretty good focus on chapter 4, I will say.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, I'm going to roll back up to Wendy's question. And I will start this off. As we all know, as fire officials, this red book that we utilize is not a black and white book. So there is a lot of gray in this book, and there's a lot of gray as to how we as professionals utilize the book. So I will also say that we as fire officials are very, very aware of how, or we understand and how we understand that fire drills are very important aspects of fire safety for these types of facilities. I agree 100% with you, Wendy, that they are in some cases very confusing, and they cause problems within these types of facilities. As you all well know, or you may not know, I've spent a lot of time in the healthcare arena, and we run into this quite frequently when we're into our skilled nursing and our hospitals or ASCs for that matter. So I will say that, you have some black and you have some gray. But I will say also that it's very specific in chapter 4 that occupant participation is required. So I wouldn't venture too far away from that. And I understand that you see that there's 3 different shifts, and so they're supposed to be doing those semi-annually. So you potentially could be doing a minimum of 6 drills, right? For the entire for that year. And so 3 obviously in the first half of the year, and 3 more in the other half of the year. And then even possibly more depending on what when you have new people come in, or you have other trainings that you have to do. So I will say that, I will sell it to them. This is how we kind of sell it in our healthcare. And I would consider this healthcare as well. But we get this, like I said, in our hospitals quite a bit. Well, it causes problems, and people want to try to get up from their bed and respond to the drill and whatnot. But I will say that informing the staff and in educating the staff that this is a drill, so we're trying to help the staff train for that event that happens at whatever time in the day and is extremely chaotic, right? The drills are structured fairly well. We can structure those fairly well, and they're not as chaotic. But imagine yourselves in that building as a worker when a real event happens. It's going to be even more chaotic. So I would remind them that, yes, we understand that these could be impactful on some, our memory care folks, or even in the long-term care arena as well. But we're providing a service to make sure your staff know how to appropriately act upon an actual event. So I know that's not it's not what maybe we all really want to hear, but I think reality is the code is written obviously for a specific reason, and to, I guess, modify it to, I mean, you can modify it to some degree, but I would not have them hold the number of drills that they're supposed to have in that facility. I would caution you greatly on that piece. So I think it's more of an education piece that they have to understand that this is an essential part of their fire safety plan. So I hope that answers your question to some degree. The other thing I wanted to really touch on real quickly, Glenn, could you go back to slide number 20?
Sure.
For me, please.
Uh-huh.
And as when Glenn's doing that, I'm gonna venture into the I2 realm and the CMS type of stuff that we do here in our office. We have a set of rules that we have to adhere to on the CMS side in our I2s, the skilled nursing and the hospitals and the ASCs that we don't have in the fire code, but it's there generically, I will say. And that is what we call E-tags. And those are our emergency preparedness tags. And those are the citations that we use. They call them E-tags. So when we're in our I2s, skilled nursing and hospitals, we're looking very diligently at their emergency plan. And I encourage you folks to, thank you. I encourage you folks, to look at that emergency plan when you're in your assisted living and your residential care facilities, because they kind of mimic each other, right? We have some memory care folks that are semi non-ambulatory in some of those I1 facilities, very similar to the I2 facilities. And I will say there's 44 different citation or violation tags that we can utilize in our I2s and whatnot. And one of the biggest ones that we come upon, and it's talked about in the fire code in 404.2.2, and it says a list of major fire hazards associated with the normal use and occupancy of the premises. For some of those that know how we do our surveys and those, we asked them to put together a hazard vulnerability assessment, and basically that identifies what a facility may come across in the event of like a natural hazard, a technological hazard, or a human hazard, or in a hazardous material situation. And what they do is they rate it, and then they are to build their emergency plan off of that HVA, lack of a better term, and and basically they have to put policies and procedures together to address all those things. So if you have time, take a look at and just type it into your search engine, HVA or hazard vulnerability assessment tool, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But I just wanted to touch on that just very, very briefly. Other than that, I thank you all for coming. I thank you all for attending. I hope you got something out of this lunch and learn this year, or this month. And like Anne Marie mentioned, there's one coming up in February, and then obviously March, April, and we're going to continue doing these in conjunction with OFMA, because we really strongly believe that this is a great opportunity for the Fire Service of Oregon. Anne Marie, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. I don't really have anything else other than Glenn, Sean, thank you both very much for doing this. It was a great topic today. Definitely some good refreshers, some new information. I'm actually really excited to see the definitions in its own section instead of playing the hunt game every day. So that's actually good. It's those little things that do make our lives a lot easier, and definitely makes things much smoother when we're in there. So again, otherwise, if you would like, we'll be sending out all the information to register soon for the February 13th at noon. Otherwise, thank you everybody for today. Don't forget to fill out your survey. fill out your homework, turn that in, and the instructions to turn it in are also at the bottom of the homework, I noticed, so you don't have to remember immediately. So otherwise, everybody, thank you so much. Oh, my last thing is if you have any ideas that you want Glenn, Sean, or anybody else to teach, please feel free to reach out to myself or anybody else on the OFMA board. And we're always looking for new ideas. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody.